Princess Liara had always imagined her future would be her own choice. She had grown up in the royal palace of Varosha, a world of bright skies and tall crystal towers that seemed to sing whenever wind passed through them. She was the only daughter of the High Sovereign, and because of that, the weight of her people's future often rested on her shoulders even when she didn't want it. Still, she believed that at least the matter of her own life, her own companionship, would be something she could choose. But everything changed on the night her father called her to the Hall of Echoes. She entered the hall with slow steps, her heart already uneasy. The hall was huge, with mirrors lined along both sides so that whoever walked inside would see endless reflections of themselves. It was a place where the rulers of Varosha traditionally made important announcements, the kind that changed the direction of the kingdom. As soon as Liara saw her father standing at the far end in his royal cloak, she knew something serious was waiting for her. He didn't smile when she approached. His hands were clasped behind his back, shoulders straight, expression firm. Liara felt her chest tighten. "Father?" she said softly. "Why did you call me here at this hour?" Her father looked at her, his eyes heavy with the decision he had already made. "Liara, my daughter," he began, "I must speak to you about something important, something that affects our entire world." The tone of his voice alone was enough to make her uneasy. She waited for him to continue, hoping he would change the subject, hoping it wasn't what she feared. But he didn't soften. After a pause, he spoke the words that felt like a sharp stone striking her chest. "You are to be married soon." For a moment, Liara didn't speak. The air around her seemed to freeze. She felt her heartbeat slow, then speed up so fast she thought he might hear it. "Married?" she repeated, barely believing it. "To who?" Her father hesitated for just a moment, but that moment felt like an eternity. "A human." Liara stepped back as if someone had pushed her. Her eyes widened, and a wave of shock, fear, and disbelief washed through her. A human. Not a Varoshan prince, not a nobleman, not anyone from their neighboring allied worlds, but a human, from Earth. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Father, no. Not a human." Her voice trembled, and the hall's echo stretched her words out, making them sound even more painful. She remembered the stories she had grown up hearing, stories whispered by guards, stories spoken by elders who had traveled far beyond Varosha, stories of human strength, their unpredictable nature, their ability to fight even when everything was against them. To many in the galaxy, humans weren't feared because they were cruel. They were feared because no one understood how they survived so much and still stood tall. That unknown made them dangerous. Liara's father stepped closer, his voice steady but firm. "This marriage is necessary, Liara. Necessary?" she repeated, placing a hand over her chest where her heart felt too heavy. "You're offering your daughter, your only daughter, to a human? Why? For what?" "For peace," he said. "For our survival." Liara bit her lip as she struggled to steady her breath. The word survival sent a chill through her. "What danger are we facing that I don't know about?" Her father's expression shifted, and for the first time, he looked tired, older, as if the burden of ruling had finally begun to show on his face. "A war is coming," he admitted. "Our neighboring system has turned against us. They want our energy sources, our land, our people. They believe we are weak and isolated because we refuse to take sides in the greater conflicts of the galaxy." Liara listened silently, her hands shaking. "The Earth Alliance," her father continued, "has offered support. They are powerful, brave, and have survived countless hardships. Their military alone could turn the tide in our favor." "But why marriage?" Liara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why must something this personal become part of diplomacy?" Her father sighed. "Because alliances built on paper break. Alliances built on blood do not. This marriage is the strongest way to show that our bond with Earth is not temporary. Liara's throat felt dry, and every part of her ached. She turned away, trying to process everything he was saying. Humans are not like us, she said quietly. Their ways, their emotions, their instincts, everything is so different. How am I supposed to trust someone who might not even understand me? Her father stepped closer and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. This human is not a stranger to diplomacy. He is a commander, disciplined and noble. He represents the best of Earth. I would never put you in the hands of someone unworthy. But Leora couldn't accept his reassurance so easily. She remembered stories of humans enduring impossible climates, surviving in conditions that broke other species, and fighting with a fierceness that terrified entire fleets. She remembered hearing about their instinct, their hunger for survival, their ability to push past limits no one else could. How could a Varoshan princess, raised in peace and guidance, be expected to live with someone like that? Her father must have sensed her fear, because he sighed again, softer this time. Leora, I know your heart is frightened, but fear often comes from misunderstanding. Humans are not monsters. They are simply different. But different is exactly what scares me, she replied. The hall grew quiet again. Liara's eyes filled with tears. She tried her best not to show. She wasn't someone who cried easily, but tonight everything felt overwhelming. Her future, her home, her safety. It felt as if her world was changing faster than she could breathe. When does he arrive? She finally asked, her voice weak. In 2 days, her father said. The engagement ceremony will be held soon after. 2 days. That was no time at all. She had only hours to accept something she didn't know how to accept. She turned away and walked toward one of the tall crystal pillars, placing her hand against it. The cool surface helped steady her, at least a little. She could see her faint reflection in its shine eyes filled with worry, lips pressed tightly. A princess who suddenly felt more like a frightened child. Father, she said slowly, I would have done anything for our people. I would still do anything. But this feels like you're giving me away. Her father went still. She could tell her words hit him hard. He stepped up behind her, and for a long moment he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice held a sadness she rarely heard from him. I am not giving you away, he said. I am entrusting you with the future of Varosha, and I know you will carry it with dignity. Leora turned to look at him. He had always appeared strong, almost unbreakable. But tonight, she saw a father who had to make choices he didn't want to make. She saw a ruler fighting to protect his world. And she saw a man hoping his daughter would understand something that felt impossible to understand. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. I need time, she whispered. You will have it, he said gently. But the decision remains. Leora nodded slowly, though every part of her wished she could deny everything he had said. She wished she could run, hide, escape the weight of politics and alliances and wars waiting beyond the stars. But she couldn't, not as a princess, not as a daughter of the High Sovereign, not as someone born into a world where her life was tied to the fate of others. She left the Hall of Echoes with her mind racing. The palace corridors felt colder than usual as she walked through them. Servants bowed as she passed, unaware of the storm inside her heart. She reached her room, closed the door behind her, and leaned against it, letting her body go still, a human, a stranger from another world, a future she had never wanted. She looked out her window, where the sky glowed with the soft colors of Varosha's twin moons. Tonight those colors felt dimmer, heavier, as if the sky itself knew her world was shifting. Leora sat down slowly, pressing her palms together as if trying to hold something steady inside her. She wasn't ready to accept this marriage. She wasn't ready to trust a human. She wasn't ready for any of it. But whether she was ready or not, the human groom would soon arrive, and nothing in her life or her world would ever be the same again. The day the human ambassador arrived, the palace of Arosha felt different. The air seemed heavier, as if everyone in the city sensed a change, though they couldn't yet see it. Princess Leora woke early, though she had not slept well. Her mind had been racing since her father's announcement. A human was coming to her world, and she would have to meet him. The thought made her stomach twist and her hands tremble. She dressed slowly in her ceremonial gown, the colors of her planet's flag woven into the shimmering fabric. Every movement felt deliberate. Every step she took echoed in the vast corridors of the palace, a reminder that soon she would face someone entirely unknown, someone from another world with customs and instincts she did not understand. She wondered what he would look like, how he would speak, how different his eyes might be from the people she had always known. Outside, palace guards were tense, their hands resting lightly on their weapons. The shuttle that had brought him was reported to have landed an hour earlier. Leora could hear whispers in the hallways, speculation, curiosity, fear. Humans were powerful, the stories said. They could endure conditions that would destroy most other species. They were clever, adaptable, and relentless. And yet, despite all this, Leora felt a pang of anger. Why should she have to face the unknown while her people's lives rested on alliances she did not choose? The doors to the main audience hall opened with a slow hiss, signaling the human's arrival. A hush fell over the room as the palace attendants and guards stood at attention. Leora entered last, her father beside her, and saw him for the first time. He was nothing like the monstrous figure she had imagined in her mind. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm presence that somehow made the room feel less tense. His uniform was precise, military but simple, unlike the elaborate robes of Varoshan nobility. His expression was serious, but not cruel. There was a quiet confidence about him, the kind that came from someone who had faced many dangers and survived. Leora stepped forward cautiously, her steps small, unsure. I am Princess Leora," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You must be the human." He bowed lightly, not too deeply, but with respect. "Commander Elias Ward," he said, his voice smooth and even. "It is an honor to meet you, Princess." The words were polite, formal, and unexpected. Leora had been ready for arrogance or indifference, even cruelty. But instead, she faced calm composure, almost gentle. She tried not to let her surprise show. "You? Come from Earth?" she asked, almost more to herself than to him. "Yes," he replied. "I understand this. Arrangement is unusual. For both of us." Leora froze for a moment. He admitted it openly. She wasn't alone in her confusion and fear. The human acknowledged it too. Somehow, that small recognition eased the tension in her chest, though she did not want to admit it, even to herself. Her father cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Princess Leora, Commander Ward will be residing in the palace for the time being. You will need to become acquainted for the alliance, and for the upcoming engagement." "Yes, father," Leora said quietly. Though inside she felt a storm of emotions, the human stood patiently, observing her. There was no rush, no demand. He seemed aware of the weight of this meeting, aware that the princess had not welcomed him. He gave a small nod, as if to show understanding. After the formal greetings, Leora excused herself. She needed air, a moment to think. The corridors of the palace were wide and bright, filled with the subtle glow of crystals embedded in the walls. She walked slowly, trying to organize her thoughts. Her mind went over every story she had ever heard about humans, their violence, their determination, their survival instincts. She remembered tales of human soldiers who had defended entire planets alone, stories of cunning, of unshakable courage. And yet, This human did not seem like the monsters in those stories. He seemed disciplined, serious, even considerate. That thought disturbed her. Fear had been her shield. If he was not dangerous, what would she do with her fear? Later that day, she saw him walking in the palace gardens. The gardens were a place of peace, filled with glowing flowers and flowing water channels that shimmered under the twin moons. Liara paused behind a tall bush, watching him. He moved carefully, observing his surroundings, his eyes scanning, always alert. He was learning the palace's ways, the paths, the guards' routines. His movements were precise, almost like a dance of readiness. Her curiosity overcame her fear. She stepped forward quietly. "Why do you move like that?" she asked softly, startling him. He turned, his gaze meeting hers. "Move like what?" "Like you expect danger at every corner," she said, her voice small. He gave a small, almost sad smile. "Because humans, we are trained to be ready. Danger has a way of finding us, even when we least expect it. It's not that I want to fight or hurt anyone. I survive." Liara looked at him, really looked for the first time. The words were simple, but they carried weight. There was no threat in his tone, no arrogance, no attempt to intimidate. Only honesty. "You survive," she said slowly. "And you think I should trust you because of that?" He tilted his head slightly, considering her words. "Trust isn't given because of survival. Trust is earned. I hope to earn yours, but I will not demand it." The simplicity of his words surprised her. He did not try to charm her. He did not insist that she like him. He spoke as if he understood boundaries, as if he respected her fear rather than dismissing it. Liara wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself hope, but the fear in her heart was strong. Over the next hours, they observed each other from a distance. Liara watched him interact with the palace staff, the guards, the servants. He did not treat them as inferior, nor did he attempt to assert dominance. He asked questions politely, listened carefully, learned quickly. Every time she saw him act with patience and respect, a little of her fear began to shift into curiosity. That night, Liara could not sleep. She lay in her chambers, staring at the ceiling, trying to sort through her thoughts. She remembered every story she had been told about humans, every warning from the elders, every fearful whisper, and she tried to reconcile it with what she had seen today. The man who had arrived as her enemy, as a creature of unknown danger, had shown nothing but discipline, caution, and even kindness in small ways. Her thoughts wandered to the future, to the engagement, to the life she had imagined, and the one being forced upon her. She knew this was bigger than her feelings. The alliance could save her people, protect them from war, perhaps even ensure that Varosha would remain free. But at the same time, she felt trapped. She had no control over this, no choice. The following morning, she found herself in the training halls of the palace. Commander Elias had asked if she wished to see the ways humans train, and out of curiosity, and perhaps a need to understand, she had agreed. She watched as he moved, demonstrating strength, agility, and focus. It was not violent or reckless, as the stories had said. It was precise, controlled, disciplined. Every action seemed purposeful, every movement thought through. Liara felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. She realized that perhaps her fear of humans had been based on misunderstanding. They were not cruel, not inherently dangerous. They were resilient, and they were strong. But strength without control could be terrifying. What she had witnessed in Elias was strength guided by discipline and awareness. By the end of the day, Liara found herself walking beside him in the gardens again. The sun of Varosha was low in the sky, casting golden light across the water and the glowing plants. She still did not trust him fully, still did not accept what was coming, But she found herself speaking more freely than before. Why do humans survive when everything is against them? She asked. He looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. Because sometimes there is no choice. Because we care about those we love, even if the world tells us it's impossible. And because giving up isn't an option for most of us. Leora listened quietly, letting the words sink in. For the first time, she felt the beginnings of understanding. Perhaps humans were not the monsters she feared. Perhaps they were something different. Something she could respect, even if she did not yet fully trust them. As night fell and Leora returned to her chambers, she realized that the arrival of the human ambassador had shifted something inside her. Fear was still there, but curiosity and caution had begun to mingle with it. She did not know what the future would hold, but for the first time since her father's announcement, she felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to face it. And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that the real challenge had only just begun. Leora could not stop thinking about the human. Commander Elias Ward. Even though he had arrived only a day earlier, his presence seemed to linger in every corner of the palace. She caught herself glancing toward the areas where he walked or trained, her curiosity fighting against the fear that still gripped her heart. She wanted to understand him, to see the man behind the stories she had been told, but every time she tried, her imagination painted him as a threat. That morning, she found herself wandering the palace library, a place she often retreated to when her mind was restless. The library was vast, filled with ancient texts, glowing manuscripts, and data crystals that contained knowledge from across the galaxy. Leora had always loved the quiet, the smell of old books, and the soft hum of energy from the crystals. It was the only place where she could think clearly without the weight of fate, of expectations pressing on her. She sat by a tall window, watching the light of Varosha's twin moons spill into the hall. Her thoughts drifted to the human, and she wondered what had made him this way. Humans were said to be dangerous, clever, and unpredictable. How had he survived so long in a world that was not his own? What had shaped him to become this calm, disciplined man who did not strike fear, but made her question everything she had believed? As if on cue, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned slightly and saw Elias entering the library. He moved quietly, almost cautiously, as though aware of her presence, but not wanting to intrude. He carried a small device that projected holographic maps of Earth's major colonies, planets, and military positions. "Princess Leora," he said softly, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." She shook her head. "No, I am just thinking." He nodded and stepped closer, placing the device on a nearby table. "I thought you might like to see some of the places I come from," he said. "It may help you understand humans better." Leora hesitated, then approached the table. She looked at the holograms with cautious interest. She saw cities with towering structures, forests that stretched endlessly, oceans that glittered like crystal, and people moving with purpose and energy. It was beautiful and alive, yet she also saw evidence of hardship. Areas destroyed by storms, colonies rebuilt after wars, landscapes scarred by survival. "Humans endure so much," she said quietly. "Why do they survive when the universe seems so cruel?" Elias looked at her, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Because we have to. Because giving up is not an option. Humans care deeply about their families, their communities, their future. Even when everything is against us, we find a way to protect what matters. That instinct, it is stronger than fear." Leora listened intently, her heart pounding. She had expected arrogance, boastfulness, or coldness, but his words were simple and honest. There was no pride in the way he spoke, no attempt to impress her. It was simply truth, spoken from experience. "You speak as if humans are better than us," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Are they? He shook his head. No, better is not the right word. Different. Strong in ways you may not understand yet. But that doesn't mean humans are perfect. We make mistakes, we fail, we hurt others sometimes. But we survive, and we try to learn from it. That is what makes us resilient. Leora considered this for a moment. She had been raised in a world of rules, traditions, and careful control. Varosians were disciplined in our own way, but we did not face the same kinds of hardships humans did. Perhaps that was why the stories frightened her. She had imagined humans as monsters, because she could not imagine surviving the challenges they had. You survived, she said softly, almost as if she were testing him. You have seen hardship, danger, and yet you are here, calm, standing before me. How? Elias took a deep breath, his gaze steady. Because I had no choice but to keep going. Because my past taught me that protecting others is more important than my fear. Because I learned that strength without control is meaningless. And because, even in the darkest moments, hope is worth holding on to. Leora felt a lump in her throat. She did not know whether to admire him or to fear him. His words were simple, but they carried weight, experience, and wisdom. They were not the words of a monster. They were the words of someone who had survived, who had endured, and who had chosen to rise above fear rather than be consumed by it. I think I understand a little, she admitted, her voice soft. But it is still frightening. Humans are unpredictable. I do not know if I can trust you. Elias nodded, as if he had expected this. Trust is not given quickly, princess. It is earned. I do not expect you to trust me yet. But I will show you, through my actions, that I am here to protect, not to harm. For the first time, Leora felt a strange sense of relief. He was not asking her to like him, to accept him, or to forget her fear. He was simply asking for a chance, a moment to prove himself. And that small, quiet honesty made her heart beat differently. Later that day, Leora observed him in the palace training halls. He moved with precision, demonstrating strength, agility, and control. She watched as he guided the Varosian guards in defensive maneuvers, showing patience and clear instruction. He did not push them too hard, nor did he show irritation when mistakes were made. There was respect in the way he trained, and she realized that this was not the recklessness the stories had warned her about. This was discipline, focus, and purpose. She noticed small things too, the way he paused to let a guard rest, the way he listened carefully before correcting a mistake, the calmness in his eyes even when a task became difficult. For someone she had feared as dangerous and merciless, he was showing patience, care, and awareness. Later, as the sun of Varosia dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Leora found herself walking alongside him in the gardens. The air was warm, filled with the scent of glowing flowers and soft water from the flowing channels. The quiet was comforting, yet the tension in her chest remained. Why do humans fight so hard? She asked, breaking the silence. He looked at her thoughtfully. Because giving up is not an option. Because we care about those we love. Because we know that survival is not just about living. It's about protecting, learning, and growing. Humans endure because they must, and because they choose to fight for something greater than themselves. Leora pondered his words. They were simple, yet they carried the weight of truth. Humans were strong, yes, but not merciless. Their strength was guided by purpose, by care, and by determination. Perhaps she had misunderstood everything she had been told. Perhaps humans were not the monster she had feared. You speak as if you have lived through much hardship, she said, her voice soft. I have, he admitted. And I have survived, not just for myself, but for those who depended on me. That is what makes humans human. Leora was silent for a moment, letting the words sink in. She realized that the stories she had been told The stories of human cruelty, of unpredictability, of danger were only half the truth. Humans were dangerous in one way. They were strong, resilient, and capable of surviving anything. But that strength was not cruelty. It was a tool. It could be used for harm or for protection. And in Elias, she saw the latter dot as the night deepened. Leora returned to her chambers, her mind racing. Fear was still there, but now it was mixed with curiosity, awe, and a strange sense of respect. She realized that understanding did not mean trust, but it was a start. She did not know what the future would hold, or how she would feel when the engagement ceremony came. But she knew that she had begun to see the human not as a monster, but as a person shaped by his experiences, disciplined by his hardships, and guided by his values. For the first time since her father's announcement, she felt something new, a cautious hope. Perhaps she could learn to understand him. Perhaps she could see the person behind the stories, the man behind the human. And perhaps one day she could find a way to trust him. But for now, the challenge remained. Fear and uncertainty still gripped her heart, and the human presence in her life would continue to test her beliefs, her courage, and her understanding of the galaxy. And deep down, she knew that the journey had only just begun. The days that followed were strange for Princess Leora. The presence of Commander Elias Ward in the palace was no longer a distant worry. It had become a constant, undeniable part of her life. She noticed him everywhere, in the training halls, the gardens, even in the corridors where she walked to her private chambers. And with each passing moment, the fear that had first gripped her began to soften, replaced by a complicated mix of curiosity, caution, and an unspoken desire to understand him. It began one afternoon when she was walking through the eastern gardens, a place filled with glowing flowers and soft water channels. The sunlight bounced off the crystals embedded in the walls, making the air sparkle. She was trying to think clearly about the upcoming engagement ceremony and the responsibilities that had been placed upon her, when she noticed Elias moving through the garden with a careful, deliberate step. He was alone, observing the terrain, his eyes scanning every detail as though he was learning the palace itself. For reasons she could not explain, Leora felt compelled to approach him. She walked slowly, unsure whether he would welcome her or find her presence intrusive. But when he noticed her, he offered a small nod of acknowledgement rather than surprise or alarm. It was a quiet gesture, but it carried a message. He was aware, he was prepared, and he was respectful. "Commander," she said softly, unsure of the formalities. "What are you doing here?" He paused and looked at her, his expression calm. "I am observing the palace, Princess, understanding its layout, the gardens, the guards' routines. It is important to know my surroundings." She studied him carefully. The man she had once feared as a merciless being seemed almost human now, in the most literal sense. He was disciplined, yes, and strong, but there was nothing cruel about his movements. There was no arrogance, no intention to intimidate, only careful observation and thoughtfulness. "I see," she said slowly. "And do you always observe people this closely too?" "Not always," he replied with a faint smile. "Only when I need to understand the place I am in, or the people I may affect. It is not meant to intrude, only to prepare." Leora felt a flicker of curiosity. Preparation, discipline, awareness. It was not something she had expected from humans, or at least from the humans she had imagined in stories. She had imagined aggression, unpredictability, danger. But what she saw now was care and thoughtfulness, and it unsettled her in a strange way. They walked together slowly through the winding paths of the garden, neither speaking much, but the silence between them was not uncomfortable. Leora noticed small things, how Elias observed the flowers, the way he paused when a small creature scuttled across the path, the precision in his movements. Every action seemed purposeful, controlled, measured. "Do you ever rest?" she asked after a while, her voice soft. "Rest?" He repeated, tilting his head. "Yes, but I rest with awareness. Even in rest, I remain prepared for what may come. You never know when danger may appear." Liara frowned, a little frustrated by the discipline she could not yet comprehend. "Even when there is no danger?" "Even then," he replied simply. "It is habit, not fear." They continued walking, and soon they reached a small fountain at the center of the garden. Water shimmered in the sunlight, the gentle sound of flowing liquid filling the air. Liara hesitated, then sat on the edge, her hands clasped together. Elias remained standing, watching her carefully, but he did not intrude. "I am afraid," she admitted quietly. "I know you are not the enemy, and yet I cannot help fearing what I do not understand." Elias nodded. "Fear is natural. You are in a new situation, one that affects your life and the lives of your people. It is reasonable to feel fear, but fear does not have to control you. It can be a guide if you allow it to teach you rather than consume you." His words were simple, almost gentle, but they carried meaning. Liara looked at him, studying his face, and for the first time, she felt that she might be able to trust him, not fully, not yet, but perhaps enough to understand him better. Over the next few days, Liara and Elias began to spend more time together, though neither forced the interaction. Sometimes they walked in the gardens, observing the plants and the flowing water. Sometimes they wandered through the palace halls, learning the routines and paths together. Liara asked questions, sometimes small, sometimes serious, and Elias answered honestly, never dismissing her curiosity or impatience. She learned about his life before arriving in Varosha, about the hardships he had endured, the choices he had made, and the lessons he had learned from survival. He spoke of his world, of humans, of challenges and victories, in a way that was neither boastful nor proud. Liara listened, and slowly, the stories that had once seemed frightening began to make sense. Humans were strong, yes, but not merciless. They were shaped by their experiences, their hardships, and their need to protect and endure. One afternoon, they found themselves in the training hall again. Elias was showing a group of Varoshan guards a new defensive technique, and Liara watched with interest. She noticed how patient he was, how he corrected mistakes without harshness, and how he encouraged careful observation rather than recklessness. She realized that his strength was not in brute force alone, but in teaching, guiding, and protecting. "Do you ever get tired of being so disciplined?" she asked quietly, stepping closer. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But discipline is not just a choice. It is a responsibility. It protects those around me as much as it protects me." Liara thought about that. Responsibility, protection, strength guided by care. She had been raised with rules, traditions, and careful guidance, but she had never considered strength in this way. Humans were different, yes, but perhaps they had lessons she could learn from. If she were willing to listen, as days turned into weeks, their interactions became more natural. Liara still felt fear, but it was no longer paralyzing. She had begun to see Elias as a person, not a threat. His presence was no longer a shadow hanging over her life, but a reality she could observe, understand, and slowly respect. One evening, they were walking along the palace balcony, watching the twin moons rise over Varosha. The air was cool, the sky a mixture of deep blues and purples. Liara felt a strange mixture of peace and anticipation. She realized that she was beginning to enjoy these moments. These shared silences, these small conversations. "You are different from the humans I imagined," she said softly. "I thought you would be frightening, harsh, merciless." Elias looked at her, his expression calm. "I am different too, Princess. Humans are many things, but they are not all one way. Just as Varosians are not all one way. We are shaped by experience, by choices, by the situations we face. Fear does not define us. Understanding does. Leora nodded slowly, considering his words. She realized that the real challenge was not the engagement, the political alliance, or even the presence of a human in her life. The challenge was understanding, trust, and perspective. She had been taught to fear what she did not understand, but perhaps now she could learn to see clearly, without prejudice or assumption. The bond between them was still fragile, delicate and unspoken, but it was growing. Small gestures, a shared glance, a quiet conversation, a moment of mutual understanding were weaving a connection neither could deny. Leora felt her heart shift, ever so slightly, from fear toward curiosity, from uncertainty toward cautious trust. One day, as they were walking through a secluded part of the palace gardens, a small crisis arose. A group of palace workers had accidentally triggered a malfunction in a security system, causing alarms to blare and lights to flash. Leora froze, unsure what to do. She had always relied on the palace guards for protection, but now the responsibility seemed immediate, and Real. Elias moved quickly, taking control of the situation with calm authority. He guided the workers to safety, deactivated the malfunctioning system, and reassured the guards. Liara watched in awe as he managed the chaos without panic, without force, with careful precision. For the first time, she understood something deeply. Humans were not merciless. They were disciplined. They did not seek chaos, they managed it. They were capable of immense strength, yes, but also immense care. And in Elias, she saw the proof. After the situation was resolved, Leora approached him. I think I understand a little more now, she admitted. Not everything, but enough to see that you are not what I feared. Elias nodded, offering a faint, almost shy smile. Understanding is a start. Trust may come later. Leora felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps the impossible was not so impossible after all. Perhaps humans were not the monsters she had imagined. And perhaps, in time, she could learn to trust, respect, and even value the presence of this human in her life. As night fell, the palace quieted. Leora returned to her chambers, her thoughts filled with the day's events. Fear still lingered, but it was no longer the dominant force. Curiosity, respect, and cautious trust had begun to grow, slowly but unmistakably. She realized that the journey ahead would not be easy, but it was one she could face with a clear understanding of who Elias was, and perhaps who she could become in the process. The future remained uncertain. The engagement loomed, the alliance waited, and the galaxy's challenges were far from over. But for the first time, Leora felt that she was not entirely alone in facing them. She had begun to see the human not as a threat, not as a monster, but as a person, complex, disciplined, and capable of care. And that small realization changed everything. The morning air in the palace of Varosha carried a tension that Leora could feel deep in her chest. Something was wrong. The usual calm hum of the palace, the soft glow of the crystal corridors, the quiet murmur of servants and guards, it all felt different today. Even the twin moons seemed to cast a sharper light, as if the world itself was aware that something was about to happen. Leora woke early, her mind restless. She had grown accustomed to the presence of Commander Elias Ward, the human who had arrived in her life with a weight she could not ignore. Over the past weeks, she had begun to see him not as a threat, but as a person disciplined, careful, and capable. Yet today, the usual calm that she associated with him felt replaced by urgency. There was a subtle intensity in the way the guards moved, in the hurried whispers of the palace attendants, in the sudden flashes of light from the security monitors. She dressed quickly, pulling on her ceremonial robes even though no formal meeting had been scheduled. Something deep inside told her that this was not a normal day. As she stepped into the grand hall, she saw Elias already there, speaking in low tones with the palace security officers. His posture was tense, alert, his eyes scanning every corner of the room. Liara noticed the calm discipline she had admired in him before was still present, but now it carried an edge of urgency. "What is happening?" she asked, her voice steady despite the worry rising in her chest. Elias turned to her, his expression serious but composed. "There's a security breach," he said simply. "I'm not certain yet how extensive it is, but it could be dangerous. I need you to stay in the safe zone until I have assessed the situation." Liara felt a shiver run down her spine. Fear, once softened by curiosity and respect, now returned in full force. Yet, unlike before, she did not feel paralyzed by it. She trusted Elias to handle the situation, and that trust, small as it was, gave her a sense of steadiness. She followed his instructions, moving to a secure chamber within the palace. Guards flanked the corridors, and the soft hum of crystal lights seemed to pulse faster as they moved. Liara watched Elias from the corner of her eye as he coordinated with the security officers, issuing calm, precise orders. His voice was quiet but firm, a steadying presence in the sudden chaos. Minutes passed like hours. Liara could hear the distant alarms, the shouts of guards, the occasional metallic clang from the palace corridors. She felt trapped, yet strangely protected. Elias was in control, and that knowledge gave her a strange reassurance. Even as her heart raced out suddenly, the doors to the secure chamber opened, and a young officer entered, breathless. "Princess, the intruders have been contained," he said. "They were attempting to access the palace data cores." Commander Ward stopped them before any damage was done. Liara's shoulders relaxed slightly. She could see Elias approaching, his expression calm but serious. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying concern despite the urgency of the situation. "Yes," she said quickly, though the adrenaline still ran through her veins. "Thanks to you." He nodded, a faint shadow of a smile appearing on his lips. "It is my responsibility. Your safety is part of that." For the first time, Liara realized just how much she had come to rely on him, not just as a presence, but as someone who could take action when fear became real. She had respected him before, but now she felt something deeper: gratitude, trust, and a tentative bond that had been forged in the fires of crisis. After the intruders were escorted from the palace and the security systems restored, Elias suggested they walk in the gardens. The fresh air, the soft light, and the gentle sound of water channels helped to calm the tension that still lingered. Liara followed him, still silent, still processing what had just happened. "You handled that very well," she said quietly as they walked along the glowing pathways. I don't know if I would have been able to act so calmly in your place." Elias glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Calm comes from preparation, Princess. Fear will always exist, but discipline and awareness allow us to act despite it. You have fear, yes, but you also have courage. Courage does not mean the absence of fear. It means acting in spite of it." Liara considered his words. Courage, acting despite fear. It was a lesson she had known in theory, but had never truly faced until today. Seeing the intruders, feeling the alarms, knowing the potential danger, it had all tested her in ways she could not have anticipated. And she had survived, with guidance, and she had learned as they walked further into the garden. Liara found herself asking questions she had not voiced before. "How do humans manage fear?" she asked. "Do you ever feel afraid, Commander?" Elias looked at her, his gaze steady. "Yes, fear is natural. It is a signal, not a weakness. Humans have learned to listen to fear, to prepare for it, and to act even when it is present. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. Liara felt a sense of understanding blooming inside her. She had watched him face danger calmly, but now she saw that his calmness did not mean he was without fear. He had simply learned to manage it, to let it guide him rather than control him. "You make it sound simple," she said softly, a hint of amusement in her voice. "But I imagine it is not." He smiled faintly. "It is never simple. Every situation is different. Every choice carries risk. But discipline, observation, and careful action make it manageable." Their conversation drifted into silence, comfortable and reflective. Liara noticed the small things about him, the way he paused to examine a flower, the careful way he stepped over the water channels, the respect he showed for the surroundings. It was the same attention to detail he had shown in the crisis earlier, and she began to understand that this was who he was, whether in danger or in peace. That evening, as the palace settled into quiet, Liara found herself reflecting on the day. The crisis had tested her in ways she had not expected, and it had revealed truths about herself as well as Elias. She realized that fear, once a paralyzing force, could be transformed into respect, understanding, and even cautious trust. Elias had proven himself not through words alone, but through action. He had faced danger, managed chaos, and protected those under his care without arrogance or cruelty. And in doing so, he had shown Liara a way to see beyond her assumptions, to recognize strength guided by care, and to understand that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Over the next few days, the bond between Liara and Elias deepened. They trained together in the gardens, discussing strategy, observation, and discipline. Liara found herself asking more questions, testing her understanding of humans, and exploring the nuances of courage and responsibility. Elias responded with patience, never dismissing her thoughts or fears, guiding her with subtle wisdom and careful instruction. One afternoon, they sat quietly by a reflecting pool, watching the water shimmer under the twin moons. Liara felt a rare sense of peace mingled with anticipation. She realized that her feelings toward Elias were changing. Fear was no longer dominant. Respect, curiosity, and a cautious connection were growing in its place. "Do you ever wish things were different?" she asked suddenly. "That you were not here, that this engagement, this alliance, none of it existed?" Elias considered her question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then I realize that every experience, every challenge, every person I encounter shapes who I am. Even difficult situations teach us. And I have learned much from being here about your world, your people, and even about myself." Liara nodded slowly, understanding his words in a way she had not before. Life was unpredictable, and fear would always exist. But learning, understanding, and acting with care could transform challenges into opportunities. She saw now that the presence of Elias in her life was not a threat, but a lesson, a guide to courage, trust, and the strength to face the unknown. That night, as she prepared for rest, Liara felt a mixture of exhaustion and clarity. The events of the day had tested her, but they had also revealed the depth of her own resilience. She understood now that courage was not the absence of fear, and trust was not given blindly. It was earned through action, discipline, and integrity. Elias had demonstrated all of these qualities, and in doing so, he had earned a small place in her heart, not fully, not yet, but enough to begin seeing him not as a human to fear, but as a person to understand. And deep within, she knew that the coming days would bring more challenges, more lessons, and more opportunities to test the fragile trust and respect that had begun to grow between them. But for the first time, she felt ready. She was no longer paralyzed by fear. She was strengthened by understanding. And in that strength, She felt the beginnings of a bond that could withstand the trials yet to come. The day of the engagement ceremony had arrived, and the palace of Varosha was alive with activity. Servants moved quickly through the halls. Guards took their positions, and the crystal corridors shimmered under the light of the twin moons. Princess Leora walked through the palace with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. This day had been foretold for years, spoken of in the stories of the council and whispered in the corridors of power. But now that it had arrived, the reality was far more complex than she had imagined. She felt the weight of her duty pressing upon her shoulders. As the future leader of her people, her choices mattered. Every step, every word, every expression would be watched, analyzed, and judged. And yet, underneath that sense of responsibility, there was something else, something she could not ignore. The human, Commander Elias Ward, had become a part of her world in a way she had never expected. His presence, his calm strength, and the lessons he had taught her over the past weeks had changed her perception of fear. Courage and trust, that Elias stood at the far end of the grand hall, his posture disciplined and composed as always. He was calm, yet there was a quiet intensity in his eyes, a readiness that told Leora he was prepared for anything that might occur. She noticed the way the guards flanked him, following his subtle cues, responding to his unspoken commands. He was a presence that demanded respect, not by force, but by sheer competence and awareness. As the ceremony began, the council members and dignitaries took their seats. The hall shimmered with ornate decorations, symbols of Varosha's history and power. Leora moved forward, her steps measured, her mind alert. She felt Elias's eyes on her, not with judgment, but with a steady assurance that gave her courage. The formalities began. Words were spoken, alliances were acknowledged, and the engagement itself was declared. Leora kept her composure, but her mind was alive with thoughts. She remembered the first day Elias had arrived, the fear that had gripped her heart, the uncertainty that had followed. And now, as she stood in the grand hall, she realized how much had changed. She had seen him in crisis, in calm, in reflection. She had learned to understand him, and through that understanding, she had begun to see herself differently as well. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the palace. The twin moons' glow seemed to flicker, casting shadows across the walls. Leora's heart jumped. The council members murmured nervously, and the guards immediately moved to respond. Elias stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the hall. "Stay calm," he said quietly, his voice carrying a calm authority that cut through the panic. "Everyone follow the evacuation protocols. Princess, come with me." Leora felt a surge of adrenaline, but she did not hesitate. She moved alongside him, trusting the man who had taught her courage and discipline over the past weeks. Together, they navigated the palace corridors, avoiding areas that had been compromised. Guards and staff followed their lead, and the chaos was managed with a precision that only Elias could inspire. As they reached a secure chamber, Elias activated a holographic display showing the breach points and the positions of the intruders. Leora watched as he quickly assessed the situation, issuing orders to neutralize the threat without unnecessary harm. The intruders were a group of mercenaries attempting to sabotage the palace and destabilize the engagement. But Elias remained calm, precise, and deliberate. Every action was calculated, every decision made with care. "You've learned well," he said quietly to Leora as they observed the situation. "Stay focused and remember what we practiced. Fear is natural, but it cannot control you." She nodded, taking a deep breath. The lessons of the past weeks crystallized in her mind. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. Discipline, observation, and careful action were tools to manage chaos. And trust in the right people made all the difference. dot 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 dot. Next part.